Today, we are digging into a question that's probably crossed your mind, maybe even kept you up at night. It's a tough one.
Why is it that good people, people like you and me, sometimes see someone in trouble and just do nothing? We all like to think we'd be the hero, the one who steps in. But the reality, well, it can be a lot more complicated. So let's get into it and unpack why we sometimes freeze when we should be acting.
And this is the story that really kicked everything off. You might have heard it. Back in 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment in New York. The story that went around the world was shocking. 38 of her neighbors supposedly saw or heard it happening, and nobody did a thing to help. Now, we've since learned the real story is a bit more nuanced. Some people actually did try to help, but that initial powerful narrative, it forced us to ask some really uncomfortable questions about ourselves.
And it gave a name to a phenomenon we now call the bystander effect. It's this strange, counterintuitive idea. The more people there are watching an emergency, the less likely it is that any single one of them will actually step up. Kind of weird, right? You'd think more people means more help, but it's often the exact opposite.
So early on, psychologists came up with 3 big reasons why this happens. First, you've got diffusion of responsibility. That's the little voice in your head that says, hey, there's a whole crowd here, I'm sure someone else will handle it. Then there's evaluation apprehension, which is just a fancy way of saying we're afraid of looking stupid. What if I jump in and it's not a real emergency? I'll look like an idiot. And finally, pluralistic ignorance. This one's fascinating. It's when we look around, see nobody else is panicking, and think, well, if they're not worried, it must be fine. So everyone is looking to everyone else for cues, and nobody moves.
Okay, so you might be picturing this happening on a busy city street. But the biggest crowds today, they aren't on the sidewalk, they're online. And the bystander effect is alive and well right there on our screens.
Get ready for this number. An absolutely staggering 88% of American teens say they've seen someone being bullied on social media. That means almost every young person out there has been a bystander to online cruelty.
And this is where you really see that gap. While almost everyone has seen it happen, one study found that nearly 70% of those kids do, well, nothing. They just scroll on by. You've got this massive silent audience watching it all unfold.
And here's why that silence is so devastating. The research is incredibly clear on this. When even one person, just one, steps up and says something, it can completely change the game. It can stop the bullying, and just as importantly, it can drastically reduce the pain the victim feels. So our actions, or our lack of action, it really, really matters.
So if the stakes are that high, what's short-circuiting our good intentions? To figure that out, we have to look past the classic explanations and actually peek inside our own brains. What's going on in there?
Okay, so when we see someone in distress, our brain basically has 2 different alarm systems that can go off. One is sympathy. That's an outward-focused response. It's that feeling of compassion, of caring for the other person, and it's what pushes us to help. But then there's the other alarm, personal distress. This one is all about you. It's that awful, anxious, uncomfortable feeling that just makes you want to get away from the situation as fast as possible. And that personal distress, it's what hijacks everything. It hits the big red panic button in our primitive brain, the old fight, flight, or in this case, freeze system. And having other people around actually cranks up that feeling of distress. So when we freeze, it's not really a conscious choice. It's a gut-level biological reflex. It's our brain trying to protect us from a situation that feels overwhelming. So if freezing is just a reflex, are we doomed to be passive bystanders forever? Well, the answer is a big, hopeful no. And some amazing new research actually gives us a roadmap for how to override that reflex and turn our good feelings into real action. So here's the pathway a huge 2023 study figured out. It all starts with empathy, that ability to connect with what the victim is feeling. That empathy then fuels our moral judgment, the part of us that says, hey, this is wrong, someone should do something. And that sense of right and wrong is what ultimately pushes us toward wanting to help. But wait, there's a missing link in that chain. Because it's one thing to feel empathy and know something is wrong. It's another thing entirely to actually do something. And the key that unlocks that final step is something researchers call self-efficacy. In plain English, it's your confidence. It's believing that you can actually make a difference. And you have to see this graph because it shows everything. For people with low self-efficacy, that's the flat line on the bottom. Even if they know something is morally wrong, they don't really act. But look at the people with high self-efficacy, that super steep line at the top. For them, moral judgment is like a supercharger. It directly translates into action. So what this all boils down to is pretty simple.
Believing you can help is the thing that turns good intentions into good deeds.
So the big question is, how do we get that confidence? How do we stop being a bystander and become what people are starting to call an upstander? Let's get practical and turn all this science into a real action plan.
The most important thing is to prepare before you're ever in that high-pressure situation. First off, just learning about the bystander effect, which, hey, you're doing right now, makes you way more likely to act. Second, you gotta practice. Start small. Call out a rude comment online. Speak up in a low-stakes situation. And third, have a phrase ready in your back pocket. Something simple like, hey, are you okay? Or let's all take a breath.
Okay, and for when you're in the moment, remember these 4 simple steps. 1. Pause. Actually notice what's going on and decide if help is needed. 2. Act. Do something, anything, to break that freeze response. Doesn't have to be perfect. 3. Delegate. This one is huge. Break the spell of the crowd by singling one person out. Point and say, you in the blue shirt, call for help. It makes it personal and gives a clear task. And 4. Support. Maybe it's not safe to jump in, but you can record what's happening or you can go to the victim afterward and just be there for them.
And please, remember this, you don't have to be a superhero. Your job isn't always to stop the bad guy. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is to just show the person being hurt that they are not alone. To that person, your simple act of solidarity can change everything. You know, we started this whole conversation by asking why good people do nothing, but now we have the science. We understand our own reflexes, and we have a toolkit to fight back against them. The bystander effect is real, it's powerful, but it is not destiny. So the real question isn't, why don't we act anymore? It's, what will we do now? Now that you know how it all works, what will you choose to do next time?